was destined to be the jet that revolutionized air travel forever. The Very Large Subsonic Transport, or VLST, it represented the cutting edge of aviation innovation, promising to relegate the jumbo jets of the past directly to the scrapyard. It was designed to be the largest passenger plane ever conceived. It would carry twice as many people, weigh 3 times as much, and was projected to earn its manufacturers millions. Yet, despite all of these grand promises, it was shelved before a single plane could even be built. But what convinced one particular company that such an ambitious design represented the future of aviation? What exactly did this aircraft look like, and which decisions ultimately doomed the project, turning it into a complete and utter disaster? This wasn't just a jumbo jet, it was a jumbo jet, and it was awful. From early mornings to late nights, your mother is always moving. She's doing work, errands, phone calls. And this Mother's Day, give her something that she'll actually use, like the everyday Earbuds by Raycon. They've got active noise cancellation, which means that your dear old mum can finally get a moment of peace, even if you're vacuuming in the next room like a good son or daughter. Plus, they come with a sleek wireless charging case that's compact enough for a person stylish enough not to look out of place. Battery life, 32 hours, and with quick charge, 10 minutes gets you 90 minutes of playback. They also connect to 2 devices at once, so you can swap between your phone and laptop without tech support, which your mum probably needs, doesn't she? These are fantastic earbuds. I've popped them in a lovely case that Raycon make as well, just to protect the outer case there. And it looks fantastic. It's kind of got this beautiful marbly texture. It's soft to the touch. Very, very nice. So go to buyraycon.com/megaprojects to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/megaprojects. Sponsored by Raycon. And now back to today's episode. In the 1990s, air travel was becoming increasingly popular throughout the world. As airfare prices dropped and more people were able to travel more frequently, airports began swelling with passengers. Aircraft manufacturers took advantage of this trend, selling planes to airlines that in turn secured valuable landing slots to offer more flights for their vacationing customers. However, this system had a drawback. It had an upper limit. The busiest airports in the world, such as Heathrow in London, quickly reached full capacity, causing landing slot prices to rise dramatically. Airlines were forced to spend millions to acquire these coveted slots. While the spike in pricing was lucrative for the airports, airlines understandably disliked the increased operating costs. Airplane manufacturers observed this issue as well. Eventually, landing slots would become so costly that the airlines could no longer justify the expense, as their returns wouldn't cover the high price. As a solution, aircraft started becoming larger to accommodate more passengers per flight. Bigger planes meant airlines paid more to the manufacturers, but they could also sell more seats, generate more revenue, and continue bearing the increased landing slot costs. Ultimately, this created a solution which everyone involved benefited. This had been an ongoing theme since the early 1970s, when jumbo jets were first being manufactured, and the gold standard at the time was undoubtedly the Boeing 747. By the 1990s, however, the 747 was beginning to seem a bit outdated, and many believed something bigger would soon replace it. Any company aiming to dominate the market for decades would need to develop an aircraft that would completely surpass everything else in terms of passenger capacity. Coincidentally, around this same period, the US military's heavy-lift aircraft were nearing the end of their contract. One company saw this as an opportunity to potentially capture the best of both worlds. You've probably heard of this company. I mean, they've built a few planes before. It's Lockheed Martin. The way Lockheed saw it, they could potentially solve 2 problems at once. They could design a large transport aircraft suitable for military use, but flexible enough to be retrofitted for hundreds of vacationing passengers. A successful design would not only secure lucrative US military contracts, but also generate massive commercial profit through sales to airlines. Lockheed had already successfully entered the passenger jet market with their tri-jet design. Now it was simply a matter of repeating that success on an even larger scale. But there was a problem. Lockheed wasn't sure what design would work best for transporting hundreds of passengers. Nothing on this scale had ever been attempted before. To explore possibilities, they visited their friends at NASA and drew up several concepts. They designed one aircraft resembling a stealth bomber, another as a large seaplane, and even created whatever the heck this is. Finally, after reviewing numerous concepts, they found one that they believed would work. Officially called the Lockheed Very Large Aeroplane, I know, very original, it was known internally as the Very Large Subsonic Transport, or VLST. And it wasn't just going to kill the 747, it was envisioned as the next stage in its evolution. Just look at it. Modern digital mock-ups make it appear as if a 747 had swallowed another 747. With a wingspan of 85 meters, 282 feet, and measuring just under 80 meters, or 262 feet in length, it was an absolute behemoth, weighing an astonishing 635,000 kilos. To put that into perspective, that's exactly the same weight as Brazil's famous Christ the Redeemer statue, which is quite big. Now imagine flying something of that magnitude. This aircraft would have weighed 3 times as much as the original 747. Looking at the designs, you can immediately see how it completely dwarfed even the largest jetliner of its time, the C-5 Galaxy. It was intended to be the largest passenger aircraft in the world, and even today, 3 decades later, it would still rank among the largest planes ever conceived. So, what exactly did the designs call for? First off, it all began with 4 ultra-powerful jet engines designed to lift this giant off the ground. This aircraft featured a semi-double-decker layout when configured for passenger transportation, but it was capable of even more. Passengers would occupy the upper deck, while beneath them stretched an enormous cargo hold, capable of simultaneously holding up to 16 shipping containers for mass cargo transit. Because its wingspan was so vast, it was designed with folding wings that could be reduced to around 64.3 meters or 211 feet when needed, and beneath the fuselage it had an impressive 18 separate sets of wheels to ensure smooth landings despite its immense weight. Yet what truly set the VLST apart was the sheer number of passengers it could carry. Using a standard 3-class configuration, typical of most airlines, it could accommodate an astounding 900 passengers, nearly double what a Boeing 747-8's maximum layout, 467 passengers, could handle. Both upper and lower decks would have a remarkable 17 seats per row, arranged in a 3-4-3-4-3 seat configuration, separated by 4 individual aisles. Still, you wouldn't want to be in the middle seat. So, by leaving all other airliners in the dust when it came to passenger capacity, Lockheed was convinced that this aircraft would revolutionize air travel for civilian and military passengers alike. They estimated that they could sell between 280 and 370 of them in total, and had they done so, it would have undoubtedly been a roaring success. How disappointing, then, that they never sold a single one. As we now know, the Lockheed Very Large Subsonic Transport never went down in history as a global behemoth, warmly remembered for its military and civilian roles, nor for transporting 900 passengers at a time on profitable journeys. None of it ever happened. So, why? Well, as it turns out, the proposal to build this giant aircraft raised far more problems than the aircraft itself was ultimately worth. And many of these issues stemmed directly from its sheer enormous size and scale. You've got to understand here that if it were released today, the VLST would be one of the largest aircraft ever conceived, quite possibly the single largest mass-produced passenger jet of all time. Back in the 90s, when the company was developing this thing, the world was just not prepared for it. Even Lockheed Martin themselves eventually produced a damning report admitting that they had no idea how to build such an enormous aircraft, nor did they have the resources needed to pull it off. Remember, this is Lockheed Martin we're talking about, the same company that builds space planes and advanced fighter jets, and one capable of sending a 6-foot dose of freedom straight through your bedroom window from thousands of meters up in the sky. Yet not even they could figure out exactly how to create the VLST. The same people who engineered the SR-71 Blackbird 3 decades earlier decided that this project was simply too complicated. And look, to be fair to them, they could have built it, and it would have flown. But the fact they felt daunted by the task to the point of canning it should tell you all you need to know about the scale of the challenges that they were facing. The biggest issue was its weight, and the compounding problems that stemmed from that. At 635,000 kilograms, the VLST was a massive aircraft. But that was precisely the point. It needed to be enormous to carry everything it was expected to handle. However, once hundreds of passengers, their luggage, and cargo equivalent to 16 shipping containers were added, the aircraft's weight became slightly excessive for anything that was intended to stay airborne for a significant period of time. Because of this, its maximum range was limited to approximately 5,900 kilometers, which is just enough to fly from London to New York, but only barely. Should the aircraft need to circle due to adverse weather, air traffic, or other delays, it would create an extremely risky situation for the nearly 1,000 people on board. And that also meant that anything beyond this range couldn't be completed in a single direct flight. For flights to Asia, for example, the aircraft would need to depart from the west coast of the US, land in Hawaii for refueling, and then resume the journey to reach the Asian mainland. Such a stopover made this far from an ideal investment. The limitation effectively restricted what the VLST could achieve, consequently limiting its potential market share as well. And that was just the tip of the iceberg for this white whale. Due to the massive size of the aircraft, airports worldwide would need to considerably alter their layouts and existing infrastructure just to accommodate it. Simply storing the aircraft required specialized hangars. Airports themselves would need significant reinforcement, including the runways, as the VLST's immense weight could crush standard tarmac surfaces. Gates would have to be adapted to properly service the aircraft, and all ground vehicles interacting with it would also require upgrading to handle its unprecedented scale. Altogether, these adaptations would cost airports millions, if not billions of dollars to complete. Realistically, it would be extremely challenging for Lockheed Martin to convince airports around the globe to undergo such major changes for a single aircraft model, thereby limiting the VLST's market share even further because it couldn't land at the majority of airports. Cost was also a major concern for Lockheed. In today's money, the VLST would have cost around $500 million per unit to produce. Although this figure is not far off that of the subsequently developed Airbus A380 in the 1990s, when aircraft manufacturers weren't yet at the advanced stage they are today, such an investment posed considerable risk. This was especially true for Lockheed, which had been absent from the commercial airliner market for some time. Consequently, potential buyers sought the assurance of guaranteed success, a certainty that the VLST simply couldn't provide. It is reported that Lockheed considered partnering with its main rivals, Boeing and Airbus, to get the idea off the ground. However, later reports highlighted that developing these planes at all would have cost approximately $18 billion, an amount that simply wasn't feasible back then, even when considering a joint effort between three of the largest and wealthiest aircraft manufacturers in history. As we know, Airbus went on to produce the A380, although that aircraft was announced before the VLST was designed, and also already had its A340 series. Boeing, too, reportedly had its own designs in place to develop a massive jetliner. Thus, if there were any companies who could help Lockheed bring the VLST to life, Airbus and Boeing were the clear choices. Yet perhaps the significant cost of the project, especially when both Airbus and Boeing already had very similar programs under development, simply didn't make financial sense at the time. Ultimately, Lockheed was unable to persuade the other two manufacturers to join the venture. However, there might have been other reasons beyond just the financial costs that discouraged Airbus and Boeing from participating. The VLST would have faced numerous safety issues if it had been built. For starters, the aircraft was potentially highly dangerous to other planes at the airports where it would operate. Imagine for a second that money was no object. Airport modifications were made wholesale, and the three companies teamed up to make it happen. Even then, whenever one of these aircraft hit the runway, it could cause considerable chaos for nearby planes. Because the plans for the VLST made it so incredibly heavy, it needed 4 absolutely massive engines just to get off the ground. Consequently, it would have had to reach extremely high speeds before it could successfully take off. At these speeds, the aircraft would leave behind a powerful vortex of air known as wake turbulence. Wake turbulence intensity is influenced primarily by an aircraft's mass, speed, and the distribution of pressure generated along its wings. Since the VLST needed to achieve high speeds, combining that with its already enormous mass and the vortices created during takeoff or landing could easily destabilize other aircraft. In fact, a sufficiently small aircraft could even be tossed across the tarmac because of these vortices. Even the Boeing 747, the plane the VLST was designed to replace, and the Airbus A380, which came after, are large enough to create similar issues. With these aircraft, wake turbulence must be actively managed to avoid endangering smaller planes. However, the VLST was even larger, heavier, and faster than both of them. Thus, one can only imagine the chaos that might ensue if this gigantic airplane were to taxi close to other aircraft. And that's only addressing the dangers the VLST posed to other planes. The risks it would have presented to its own passengers would alone have disqualified it from flying under many countries' aircraft safety regulations. Just the noise itself might have been loud enough to deafen people, especially when flying low during landing. A Boeing 747 already produces noise levels well above 100 decibels up close, which is seriously loud, and the VLST, equipped with larger engines and capable of higher speeds, could have been even louder. But that's still not everything. Due to its unconventional design compared to standard aircraft at the time, Lockheed Martin wasn't fully certain how the VLST would actually perform in flight or handle in regular day-to-day airline operations. Common sense dictates that having a 635,000 kilogram plane without fully understanding how it would behave in real-world flying conditions wouldn't just be risky, it would be pretty suicidal. The sheer size of the plane also meant it wouldn't have been able to safely navigate certain areas that would ordinarily offer comfortable margins for regular-sized aircraft, placing it at a greater risk of crash. Imagine trying to steer something 80 meters wide, traveling at speeds of 500 miles an hour or more, and, well, it's not going to go well. If the VLST did crash, how dangerous it would have been for passengers probably would have depended heavily on the location and circumstances of impact. In certain lower speed collisions on land, the larger airframe might have actually helped protect the passengers, particularly those seated further back. But that's only true on land. Had the VLST crashed into water, it would likely have been a death sentence, as the sheer weight of the aircraft would have caused it to almost immediately sink like a stone. Usually, that wouldn't pose too much of an issue. Evacuating an aircraft is normally a quick process. While the A380 is lighter than the VLST, it is still very heavy, yet it was cleared to fly over large bodies of water. However, the internal layout of this plane is very different. In a typical water-based evacuation, you'd put your life jacket on, calmly find your nearest exit, inflate your vest once you cleared the door, and slide down the yellow slide that you always wanted to use as a kid. No issue there. But how does this scenario play out if you're seated in the very middle seat of the central row among 900 other passengers with heavy cargo and aboard a plane that's rapidly sinking? Evacuating all passengers from an A380 takes around a minute and a half. On the VLST, it could take several minutes or even longer, and every second counts when over twice the passengers are present in a life-threatening emergency. And don't forget, twice the number of crash victims means twice the number of potential lawsuits. If you thought just building it was expensive, imagine facing that scenario. Even beyond all of that, it would likely have been incredibly inefficient to operate. Imagine you're sitting at your airport gate alongside 899 other people waiting to board. They start calling passengers to board, and you're in group 367. 40 minutes later, you're still in line because you have to wait for every single person ahead of you to stop, stow their bag, and shuffle past others to reach their seat. The sheer number of passengers on board would cause delays at every step, ultimately slowing down the plane's turnaround time and reducing its efficiency in moving passengers overall. It would be the same story for everything, from cabin crew distributing meals to checking whether everyone has their seatbelt fastened to loading all the luggage into the cargo hold. Before you know it, a typical 8-hour flight from London to New York suddenly becomes even longer. And do you remember how this was supposed to be converted into a military plane? Well, you can forget that idea for the reasons we've already discussed. In the end, Lockheed wisely recognized that an aircraft which was painfully inefficient, potentially dangerous, and ridiculously expensive for everyone involved probably wasn't the best idea. So, they shelved the project for good. But then, 10 years later, Airbus stepped in and did it better. So what happened after Lockheed's VLST was cancelled? Was the dream of an enormous plane capable of flying all over the world abandoned for good? Not exactly. As we mentioned throughout this video, roughly a decade after Lockheed's original designs were underway, Airbus introduced the A380. And by comparison, the A380 turned out to be quite successful. Airbus managed to sell just over 250 units to airlines around the globe. It seems likely that Airbus understood the limitation of Lockheed's VLST project and thought, what if we could achieve this without most of those downsides? The A380 became the largest, widely circulated commercial passenger aircraft ever built. It remains the only full-length double-decker plane ever created, meaning that instead of the nightmarish 5-row layout in case of an emergency, there are standard 3 rows split across 2 decks. This design kept evacuation times low and passenger efficiency high. In its standard 3-class configuration, the A380 carries far fewer passengers than the proposed VLST, with a capacity of around 525. However, it can theoretically hold up to 853 passengers in a high-density, single-class arrangement. Additionally, the A380 can fly nearly 3 times farther than the VLST's projected range, covering distances of up to 15,000 kilometers, which makes it significantly more commercially viable around the globe. At just over 500,000 kilos, depending slightly on the source, it is also noticeably lighter than the VLST's 635,000 kilos. Perhaps best of all, only some airport gates needed modification to accommodate the A380, rather than requiring upgrades to the entire world's airport infrastructure. But we can't blame the VLST for failing where the Airbus succeeded, as other companies also attempted their own super heavy aircraft designs that ultimately went nowhere. Boeing had its own concepts, and the Russian aircraft manufacturer Sukhoi had their own designs in the pipeline, none of which came to fruition. In the end, the A380 represented a compromise between the ambitious goals behind the VLST and the realities of existing global infrastructure. Airbus simply took the risk where Lockheed and others did not. Yet even then, because of its enormous production costs, the Airbus A380 itself is now finally being shelved. And look, you can't fault Lockheed Martin for their ambition, nor for deciding to throw in the towel when they realized their vision couldn't be achieved in the way they intended. In terms of go big or go home, they ultimately chose to go home. Will we ever see a plane as large as the VLST actually enter mass-scale production? It's possible. I mean, after all, it's not dramatically bigger than the A380. But any future design would more likely follow in the footsteps of the A380 rather than the VLST. It won't be easy though. Going even larger could require major modifications to airports around the world and overcoming the numerous challenges associated with operating aircraft at this scale. We'd likely need to see novel, innovative designs featuring new technologies capable of addressing many of the same issues that the VLST faced in 1996. Moreover, such solutions would have to be scalable and replicable. It just goes to show that bigger isn't always better. Maybe stick to the fighter jets next time, guys. Thank you for watching.